Welcome to our second episode of Grease and Grace. Michelle Obama wrote this about her experience after her father passed away. It hurts to live after someone has died. It just does. It can hurt to walk down a hallway or open the fridge. It hurts to put on a pair of socks, to brush your teeth. Food tastes like nothing, colors go flat, music hurts, and so do memories. You look at something you'd otherwise find beautiful, a purple sky, a sunset, or a playground full of kids. And it only somehow deepens the loss. Grief is so lonely this way. Tim calls this feeling of sadness that engulfs other emotions the sixth sense. He will explain this reality of grief and how important it is to rely on God's grace through the sadness and the loneliness that can envelop us while grieving. We will then listen to Danielle's story of how she found the courage to face the future after the tragic loss of her brother.
In the previous episode, I shared the story of how my late wife Laura passed away while we were on holiday with family in George. At that point when she passed away, it was like, I'd describe it as I'd been pushed off a cliff and I was just falling and really didn't know when I was going to hit bottom. And during that time, life slowed down. Time slowed down. It's like 1 minute seemed like an hour. An hour began to feel like a day, a week, a month. I write about, in my book, Grief and Grace, that this series is based upon. I write about the 6-month period after Laura passed away, towards the end of 2016. But for me, that period, it felt like years. It just felt like a very long time. Author J.K. Rowling describes Harry Potter's feelings. I know it's a fictitious example, but bear with me. She describes Harry Potter's feelings after his stepfather, Sirius Black, passed away. It says this: the week that had elapsed since Harry had last seen Sirius seemed to have lasted much, much longer. It stretched across 2 universes, the one with Sirius in it and the one without it. Like I said, although a fictitious example, it accurately describes how I felt. My world now stretched across 2 universes, the one that had Laura in it and the one I was now facing without her. It created a chasm in my life, a void in time, and one that I didn't feel equipped to face. This void I came to describe as my sixth sense. It was the overriding feeling that things were not as they should be. It was a sensation that overrode all my other senses. One means of grace I had during this time was my journal. I was an avid journal writer and wrote about my emotions and everything that I was feeling in my journal. And writing about the sixth sense, I described it this way. I would describe my new disposition as having developed a sixth sense, the constant but not always cognitive sense that Laura is missing. It's always there like oxygen, but there are times when the sense is more profound, a sharp pain, and there are other times when it is more like a dull ache. But it impacts each moment and also explains my weariness. See, the thing about the sixth sense is it's exhausting. Grief is tiring. I went on to write, I've just been on a walk on my own. I forced myself to do it as walking or being alone is so tough. I've been filling the days with activity and planning, but inevitably there are going to be gaps where I have to face the reality of Laura not being with me. And there's no escaping it. The finality of what happened 8 weeks ago causes deep hurt and pain that I simply can't always be distracted from. One thing I realize is the level of change in my life. I'm a changed man living with this sixth sense. My circumstances and life has changed almost beyond recognition. My emotional life, my decision-making, my capacity, my experience of joy, my desires, etc., all changed. But I thank God for the consistency of my faith. Those were extracts from my journal. But I also believe that the Bible is realistic about the pain of grief. We need look no further than Job, a hero in the Old Testament, as someone who persevered through great suffering. See, Job lost everything. If you read the opening chapters of the book of Job, he lost property, he lost security, he lost loved ones, and his own health suffered greatly. But in Job chapter 2, verse 8, we read this. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. I believe this describes Job's sixth sense as he was facing life in slow motion. But part of grieving is sitting on the ash heap. It's tending to our sores. For me, it was tempting to keep busy, and it can be tempting just to try and keep going, and I did that. I made endless lists, and I tried to distract myself, but ultimately, we can't run away from the pain. See, initially living with the sixth sense is a very vulnerable and difficult time. But we need to be kind to ourselves. We need to acknowledge how difficult it is. We need to cry. We need to take time to reflect. And when we do this, we begin to see time not as an enemy, not as a threat, but actually as a gift of grace. One thing during that period, I was very tempted to make some crazy life-altering decisions. As I explained in the previous episode, I had 3 children and was trying to face what does our future look like. I thought, should I quit my job? Perhaps I should move country. Maybe we should just go traveling. But I'm so glad that I didn't rush and do that. When we're actually facing the worst that life can throw at us, it is important that we don't rush. Don't rush to recover. Don't just simply try to get over it, to get back to normal. Rather, you need to give yourself time. A few weeks after Laura passed, some close friends sent me a poem that spoke right into my reality. We're just going to listen to that poem now.
Do not hurry as you walk with grief. It does not help the journey. Walk slowly, processing often. Do not hurry as you walk with grief. Be not disturbed by the memories that come unbidden. Swiftly forgive and let Christ speak for you unspoken words. Unfinished conversations will be resolved in Him. Be not disturbed. Be gentle with the one who walks with grief. If it is you, be gentle with yourself. Swiftly forgive, walk slowly, pausing often, take time. Be gentle as you walk with grief. Most other griefs are external. This is internal. A part of me has died. The person I was has died. The person I was becoming is no more. Another one lives.
This beautiful poem underlines for us some critical things as we walk through grief and loss. We need to recognize that we have changed. I need to recognize that I had changed, and everything I considered normal had been altered forever. No wonder it takes time to adjust as we learn to live in that new reality, as we learn to live with the sixth sense. And on occasion, I still experience the sixth sense, as do my children and others who knew and loved Laura. And particularly on days when we think a lot about Laura, on birthdays, anniversaries, and in family gatherings, the sixth sense comes, the dull ache and the pain returns. But you know what? Just understanding what it is, identifying that it's part of our reality, is actually a gift of grace that can help us cope. The sixth sense enables us to reflect, to remember that we are carrying a sense of loss. And it also reminds us that we're on a long journey and there are no shortcuts. The sixth sense also reminds us that we lost someone special and that their life counted because of the impact they had on us. Therefore, even though the sixth sense comes to us through grief, in itself, it can also be a means of grace, enabling us to be kind to ourselves as we continue to navigate life even if it is happening in slow motion.
Yeah, my brother was 2 years younger than me, and we weren't just siblings, we were like, he was one of my best friends. In 2009, we'd been journeying some personal stuff, both of us, together, so probably that year we grew even closer. And then in 2010, 16th of January at 6 a.m, I had a phone call to say that he'd been murdered. I think initially, when you receive a phone call like that, it's obviously, there's no words to describe how it feels. It's like your world's just been ripped apart. It doesn't feel real. It's that thing that you never ever expect to happen to your family. You see it on the news, but you never think it'll hit your family, and suddenly you're hearing words that you never thought you'd hear. And I think you go into, or I went into, almost like another zone. It just felt surreal. It felt like it couldn't be happening. In the very early days, the house was manic. It was family, friends, police, papers, and all that sort of stuff. It was like the house was absolutely buzzing with people all around, and yet I felt, and probably everyone else felt, like we were in our own brain fog, the heaviest brain fog I've ever felt. And so you could be in a room and full of people, and yet you just feel like you're in another zone. I suppose as time goes on, you have to navigate your new life, and that can be really hard at times, because it's not a life you ever wanted. I think for me, I look back on my journal a while ago, and I'd written something in that said, it's time to grab hold of the hand of the one who created you and say yes to the life you're now facing, despite everything within you screaming no. And that's exactly how it felt. It was, I don't want to do this and I don't want to be here, but I'm going to grab hold of his hand, and we're going to walk it together, and that's the only way for me that got me through. And as you start to do that, as you begin to do that more and more, you know, obviously time then does get slightly easier, but it does take time. It's coming up for 11 years this weekend, and when I look back, there's so much I've learned on the journey, but also so much I've beat myself up over. And if I was talking to someone else, and I've had to do this to myself over the years, it's the thing that everyone would say, but actually when you're in it, you often don't do it, and that's, you need to be kind to yourself. Everyone grieves in a different way, everyone's journey is different, and so often I would easily say that to someone else, but actually I'd really struggle with it myself. It's okay to love the new normal, it's okay to love life without that person. It doesn't take away the pain, it doesn't take away the fact that you'd have them back tomorrow. It's okay to enjoy the new. It doesn't take away from the old. It's the old's precious and the new's precious too, and that's what God's grace is all about.
Wow, how inspiring was Danielle's story. I hope you found today's episode really helpful. If you feel you need support in your own journey of grief, then we highly recommend you to consider joining a grief share group. Contact your local church or feel free to get in touch with us so we can connect you to someone who may be able to help. The details are on the screen. We look forward to you joining us next week.